So in this session, we're going to be discussing corporate cooperation to build circular supply chains. Companies are obviously increasingly recognizing how important it is for their supply chains to embed principles of circularity. And I'm really happy to have this collection of panelists here, I think really representing the importance from everything of materials, product design, how we engage with customers around things like refurbished or pre-owned goods. And it's really clear, what a village or a community it takes throughout the supply chain to engage those kind of circularity principles, which are so important. So how can those organizations work effectively to establish and sustain these kind of green circular systems? What are synergies that we can draw from cooperation between companies? And given sort of increasing scarcity and pollution, how is collaboration on circular supply chains likely to develop going forward? So to answer these questions, I'm pleased to welcome Renee Morin, Chief Sustainability Officer at eBay, Lisa Conway, who's Vice President for Global Market Sustainability at Interface, Kim Marotta, who's Chief Sustainability Officer at Suntory Global Spirits, and Zhang, a Global Sustainability Director for Packaging and Specialty Plastics at Dow. So welcome to all of you. I just wanted to start with maybe a general question. How do you see sort of synergies that arise from partnerships within the circular supply chain in your experience? Maybe we'll start with you, Renee.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. People might not understand where eBay fits into circularity because we don't make anything, just for the record. We're a fully third-party platform, so any seller can get on to the platform and sell what they want to sell. So our partnerships look a little bit different. Where we sit in circularity, I call as the circle within the circle. So we're e-commerce, right? So anything that's used, refurbished, pre-loved, that's sold on the platform is part of us participating in the circularity, circular economy writ large. For partnerships, they tend to be more along the lines of brands working on refurbished goods. So we don't refurbish the goods, but we have to have the partners set up. And then also for pre-loved fashion, for instance, we have a partnership with a company called Reskinned in the UK, where they do the tweaking of the garment before it's sold online through their own shop on eBay. So a little bit different than these companies who have much different supply chains than we do, but the collaboration's still just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of the direct customer interface that you're having in terms
of
what the consumer is actually looking to buy. Lisa, you definitely do make things.
Yes,
so you can tell us a little bit about, particularly around things like flooring, how does circularity play into your suppliers, how you think about building things, and also what you're selling?
Yeah, I think even to build on the panel from before, one of the most important things is to have goals and then be able to educate your suppliers on those goals. Because if they don't know what you're working towards, then they don't really know how to help you. And I, especially I have a background in sales, all I ever want to know is what the customers really need, right? So if you can help our suppliers understand that, then they can bring some really cool innovation to the table. One of the best examples I think that we have is really a call. It wasn't an RFP back then, but it was like in the late 90s. But it was kind of a bring the suppliers in, for example, yarn, which is the fuzzy face of carpet tile. And it was like the first of 3 yarn vendors to bring me recycled content yarn, which was the hot spot from a carbon perspective of our product, gets our NPD, new product development. So that was the carrot, right? We were talking about carrots and sticks, and there's a role for both of those. Now, all this time later, we have 100% recycled content nylon in our products, and we get the benefit of selling a low carbon and recyclable product, but we don't make yarn, So we need that collaboration throughout the supply chain, and it's been an amazing partnership that now they actually sell, because carpet's boring, right? Now they sell into high fashion brands that are looking to become more eco-conscious as well. So opened up a whole new platform.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Kim, can you tell us a little bit, about the circularity? You're in the drinks business. Obviously, on the packaging side, there's a lot of materials and circularity involved. Also, it seems probably on let's say, the sustainable development of what goes into those bottles, regenerative agriculture. Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Sure. So we make Jim Beam, Suntory Global Spirits, Maker's Mark, and the like, just to give you a sense of our company. And I've been involved in sustainability for at least 20 years. I'm sure, well, this is a young crowd, but I'm sure there's many others that have also been involved for a long time as well. And I think that sustainability, when we first got involved, you looked at it really as maybe more of a competitive advantage. So what can my company do to really, advance sustainability goals? And then over time, you started to look at it, well, I can't do it alone. And so many of my peers and competitors are in the same space. So how can I collaborate with my peers and my competitors to make a difference? And I think in the last 3, 4, 5 years, it's really changed. It's how do I work with my supply chain and my peers and competitors to make a difference? So I like the fact that you talked about circular, not just about packaging, but the entire notion of sustainability is circular. When we look at our greenhouse gas emissions, over 80% or about 80% are scope 3, which I'm sure many CPG companies have the same. So packaging is one of those largest components. And if we're focused on increasing recycled content or increasing recycling rates in our community or making our packaging more recyclable and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, that's not something we can do alone. We need to partner with our largest suppliers, our smallest suppliers, every supplier, and put into practices where we can really work together to get after those 4 areas.
Great, thanks. Han, obviously within the plastic space, how we think about end-of-life reuse of plastics, there's a lot of players within that chain. Can you talk a little bit about how partnerships work for you?
Sure. First of all, I'm very glad to be here. And Kim, we're here. We want to help you on the packaging side. So I work for Dow Chemical. We're one of the largest polyethylene producer. I recently moved back to Houston after 7 years in Singapore, developing the circular economy strategy, as well as building a value chain partnership in the Asia Pacific region. So I'm very happy to share some of the learnings as well as what we're doing at a global scale. To me, I think right now we're at a pivotal moment. Sustainability moved from a siloed term, which is something nice to have, to an essential part of a business. And today, business considers sustainability not a separate strategy, but part of the business strategy. And the business considers sustainability as a new value growth area. So just like many other companies, or all the companies here in the room, we set up a very ambitious target. By 2030, we want to reduce 5 million metric tons of our greenhouse gas emissions. That's a 15% reduction against our 2020 baseline. We also want to commercialize 3 million metric tons of circular and renewable solutions by 2030. So obviously, we cannot achieve those sustainability targets without the value chain collaboration. But more importantly, we cannot capture value through those sustainability targets without the value chain collaboration. Without the value chain collaboration, those targets will just sit there. Even if we achieve 5 million metric tons of carbon reduction, how can we create a value? How can we capitalize on those carbon reduction? And in order to capture that value, we believe we need a new type of value chain collaboration. So in a traditional business model, which is mainly linear, if you look at the value chain collaboration, it's mainly between the direct supplier and their direct customers. In this circular business model, the circular value chain collaboration, we consider it non-linear. And it's a web of technology, processes, company, people, and a lot of other stakeholders like policymakers, as well as an investor. And together, we can bring plastic waste and other waste material into this circular system and create a new material out of that. I just want to share one example. So as I mentioned, the traditional value chain is a direct customer work with a direct supplier. But in this material ecosystem today, we start to see more and more upstream producers work directly with end user, like Jim Beam. So one example, we recently partnered with Procter and Gamble. We announced a joint development agreement with them to develop a dissolution technology. This morning, if you were in the Virginia's session, she mentioned they developed a dissolution technology for polypropylene. So now we have this joint development agreement with them to develop the technology for polyethylene recycling. So once we have this technology, we can recycle post-consumer material, plastic waste, and create a near virgin quality plastic. So I have to give P&G the credit. Instead of just sitting there for recyclers to bring PCR material to them, which will never happen for long time because they need a food grade material. The technology, the recycler, they don't have this kind of technology. Instead of sitting there for someone to bring the material to their doorstep, they initialized this collaboration with Dow, which is a material science company, and together we are going to develop this, and then we can bring it to recyclers so that we can bring more plastic waste into this circular system. So this is the new kind of circular value chain collaboration we're developing.
Great. Maybe Kim and also Lisa, actually, but maybe starting with Kim. How do you think about the innovative nature of new technologies when you think about sort of on the packaging side? Obviously, some of the new technology that Han is talking about are really things that sort of facilitate some of that circularity, what the end of life looks like. How do you think about the procurement of materials?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your example is spot on. I mean, the whole notion of getting more PCR into PET is just, daunting. So it's the new technology that's going to help us lead the way. And then sometimes it's just new ideas. When we look at our packaging, making sure we're not over packaging, making sure that we can still distinguish our products and still be premium, but be sustainable at the same time. So there's opportunities. We're looking at, everything, and this sounds really basic, but the light weighting and the right weighting, removing handles, removing, tubes into cartons, removing secondary, all of those opportunities. And some of the other things also are just so basic about how do you make it easier to recycle? So we have distilleries in Kentucky, and most of the bourbon and whiskey distilleries are obviously in Kentucky and Tennessee. And there's not infrastructure for recycling. So the amount of glass that's just going into landfills, particularly in those states and some of our surrounding states where some of our larger glass suppliers are, is just, the recycling rate I think in Ohio is 9%. So how do we invest in MRFs, or how do we invest in new technology, and not new, how do we bring infrastructure so that we can get glass recycled and into our glass plants and really increase the recycled content? So while this is super sophisticated, there's a lot of even just basic things that need to get done.
Lisa, similarly, imagine you're working with a whole glut of from natural to chemical materials. How do you think when you source those about what the end of life looks like, and what kind of technologies do you think about?
Yeah, so there's one of the primary things that we look at, along with cost, of course, because that matters, I heard. That's what they tell me, is getting primary data from our suppliers of the carbon footprint of whatever the product is, and then, of course, seeing if that low carbon is great, but we also need circularity at end of life, and we have mixed materials. So how do those materials play with each other? Can we separate them? Can all of them go into, which is actually what we're doing now, whole carpet tiles can go into backing for new carpet tiles. So, but that primary data piece really speaks to how mature the supplier is. Like if they say, oh yeah, I have primary data, meaning the exact data for the raw material that I'm going to sell you, as opposed to us needing to rely on industry averages. That speaks to really advanced maturity, and we're like a lot more interested, because then we don't have to take this long path of education and like showing why we use that and how we get rewarded in the marketplace for circular and low carbon products, et cetera. So that's most of what we look for. Packaging is actually a very small piece, both by weight and by carbon footprint for us. And it's largely pallets that are reused, and then 100% recycled content cardboard. Shrink wrap is the piece that that needs to be worked out. Sometimes we have a source, sometimes we don't. it kind of like comes and goes.
I mean, a lot of the packaging probably stays either sort of in your hands or, I mean, it's a bit more, it makes a bit more sense. But I mean, Kim was talking about sort of what is that basic infrastructure that has to exist at the end of life to get those products back into a refurbishment, recycling. How does that work in your industry? How do you get flooring bits back from customers later in life?
It is complicated. The place that it happens the most is in California, where there actually is legislation. However, most of what gets recycled is actually residential broadloom, which we don't make. But if you think of carpet that would be in someone's house, there's a much higher yield on the face of the carpet because it's more plush and your feet sink into it, as opposed to this stuff, which is like you would have to get, a razor blade to get that out of there. So it just depends, and these are some of the trade-offs that I think are really interesting in R&D teams, where if we dematerialize our product and use less to begin with, sometimes that actually can make it harder to separate, which is why then your circular strategy has to move to, turning the whole thing into pellets and then new raw materials, as opposed to separating them into different inputs that can then be reused as the exact same input. So, lots of trade-offs to work through, and ultimately, hope that, and I think that this is the hardest part, creating a product that can be circular today versus what we think is circular product of very far tomorrow in our world. 7 to 30 years it can stay down. So what will be, the method then? So no surprise to anyone here, I'm sure, but lots of considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. Renee, sort of going back to you again, I think what's sort of unique here is a massive amount of data that you can see about sort of customer uptake for refurbished, pre-used kind of products. What do you see to be the demand driver for those kind of products? Is it really just price? And how do you sort of, how do you market something in a circular way that you wouldn't for a new way?
That's an interesting question, and also my brain. I've done a lot of life cycle assessment in my prior career.
That's what I'm trying to explain without saying that.
It's the total cost of ownership. It's where are those trade-offs happening, and being the circle within this circle. We still think about that because we're extending the life of products. At the end of the day, 40% of our GMV is used or refurbished. That means 60% is still new on eBay, which people don't always keep top of mind. When we're marketing to people, what we really are marketing is you can find basically anything you want on eBay, right? Those unique things, those things that bring you joy and like value. Sometimes they're pre-loved and sometimes they're new, but they're unique and they're collectible. So it's really about speaking to the emotion of a person and understanding like what is it that they want, what brings them that joy. We've done a lot of research on re-commerce as a whole. Typically, Gen Z, millennials would gravitate towards it more naturally. My generation, which I'm not Gen Z or millennial, we wouldn't go to thrift shops, but now thrifting is a thing, right? So I think there's been a cultural shift where there's a more holistic understanding that resources are not infinite, and the stuff that maybe my mom wore back in the 80s is cool again. So we can keep reusing these things over and over. That's part of our scenario, but also on the refurbished side, it really is about value. And the research shows, like, someone's not going to go buy a refurbished Dyson because it brings them joy. I don't like vacuuming anyway. I don't know. But it's because it's just as good as new. It has a couple-year warranty on it, and you save a bunch of money. And there's nothing wrong with that. I was having a conversation earlier today about the fact that you don't have to always lead with sustainability, right? A lot of times we have conversations, and I actually report up into finance or CFO, it is about the dollars. It is about the value. And Gina McCarthy last night was saying the same thing. We don't have to talk about sustainability for sustainability to happen sometimes. And so sometimes our customers don't want to hear that. Maybe they want to hear that you're going to get a really good deal on these pre-loved shoes that I wouldn't have afforded if I had to pay full price. So yeah, that's part of the whole story.
Yeah, and I guess, again, going back to sort of Kim's point about what the basic infrastructure is, I mean, on your side, when you are sort of taking in also pre-used goods, right, from users. How do you sort of ensure things like quality, make sure that, again, in a market where information is really key and there's more uncertainty?
Trust is a big part of our platform. It was founded on the concept that people are basically good, and we hope that stays true. And we don't touch most of the products. Most everything goes directly. If I wanted to sell this shirt, I put it online, it gets bought, I ship it to the buyer. So eBay doesn't physically touch much of the product at all, except for the ones that go through our authentication process, and that's where that additional trust comes into play. Or collectibles, or trading cards, or sneakers that are like really valuable, and those go to an authentication center, and they're validated. They get the stamp, they get the QR code, the tag that shows that this is that thing that this is the Michael Jordan Airs that you said you were going to buy. And so that trust is really important for a third-party marketplace like eBay to stay in business. Because if we don't have trust, we don't have buyers and sellers interacting with each other.
Yeah. Kim, maybe I can go to you again with this sort of consumer demand side. What is really driving sort of what are the incentives for you? Is it a consumer demand, and what does that look like from their side for someone buying Jim Beam? What are really the incentive structures?
They just want the Jim Beam.
Yeah.
Let's be real.
I have to tell you, a lot of times if you sit on a panel, the questions come to you in advance. I kind of like this that we don't have any idea what we're going to ask. So it makes it a little bit more fun.
Yeah.
So to be candid, we've looked at research, and you can think, if you're a spirits consumer or an alcohol consumer, and one of the things we ask those consumers is there one brand that sticks out that you think is more sustainable? And generally speaking, I mean, you could think about it, people are like, no, not really. I don't think about a bourbon and sustainability. But then when we tell our consumers about the Maker's Mark story and B Corp and all the wonderful things that we do about sustainability, or they visit the Maker's Mark distillery or the Jim Beam distillery, they feel better about the brand. They're more apt to want to buy the brand, and they just have a better connection because it represents their values. So we have a say-do gap that we need to close and really look at. So for us, when we do it, we're a privately held company. We're Japanese-owned by Suntory. And so it really comes down to just that connection in living in nature with harmony, or living in harmony with nature. Boy, it's our value, and I just screwed it up. No, living in harmony with nature. And so it's how we do business. It's important to us. The water where our distilleries are located are critical to our business. The raw ingredients, the corn, is critical to bourbon, and the barley, the wheat. It's just part of our product. It's wonderful when our consumers will buy our products because of it, but that's not the main reason why we're engaged in sustainability.
Right. Han, maybe I want to change gears a little bit and talk a little bit about sort of regulatory or legal sort of policy-based instruments that can sort of encourage circularity, particularly sort of in the plastic industry. I mean, I'm thinking about INC agreements, thinking about the end of life of plastic. What are your views on what's needed, and what do you support in terms of particular legal or regulatory changes?
Yeah, as mentioned, in this circular value chain, we need additional stakeholders, and the policymaker is one of the additional stakeholders. We need the right policy to set up the standard, because we're building a whole new value chain, and we need a standard, we need a regulation, so that we can accelerate a lot of the development. And talking about the INC, the Global Plastic Treaty, some of you may be aware it's under negotiation, and there will be the 5th meeting, which is the last one in November in Korea. We are supportive of developing this Global Plastic Treaty, and we believe this is the opportunity for the society and the industry to build a circular economy. And one important element being discussed under this Global Plastic Treaty is how we could finance the development of a circular economy. How, when we talk about the infrastructure, to build those infrastructure, you need a lot of capital. Where the capital is coming from? The public source is one source, but a lot will come from private companies, private industry, and extended producer responsibility is one of the very effective way to generate the necessary capital to build the recycling infrastructure. And in the U.S., there are 5 states States already established the EPR system, and we're very supportive of this kind of a development. The other thing is like a recycled content mandate. We set up the goal to deliver 3 million metric tons of circular and renewable solutions. If there is a recycled content mandate, then this will create the market pool for those 3 million metric tons of circular and renewable solutions. So yeah, we're very supportive to this global plastic treaty, but we also wanted to develop it in the right way, to correct way, to support the industry and the development of the circular economy.
Maybe Lisa or Kim, I don't know, again, sticking to this sort of regulatory, we talked a little bit about the recycled content mandates. What are the kind of rules that you're thinking about as you sort of develop your product?
Well, there's both the compliance route, right, where we can kind of see how we're going to have to comply with legislation that is coming up across the world. Of course, all of it's very different. But then we also have to decide, how do we want to build our strategy that is true to who we are, right? Not driven by necessarily only by customers, but also who we are and what ties to our brand. And then we also need to educate them on why we think that that's such an important and a more futuristic version of the strategy. So again, all of that is coming into play, and you have to check all of those different marks. Some places really prefer reuse. Places meaning around the world, different legislative approaches could be reuse, they could be actual recycling where it has to ship back to us. So a lot of that is different across the world. So it definitely ties to how we make the products that serve those markets. And we influence where we can, but we're not we're like a mid-cap publicly traded company. So we're kind of like trying to glom on to like, hey, eBay, we agree with stuff you say.
Yeah. We do that a lot, though. I think we all have to collaborate together, like our collective voices, as they say.
Exactly.
We can't get as much done. And what I think, Kim, you were saying earlier, that we collaborate much more than I think our peers do across other industries. So like my marketing team doesn't really go out and talk to Etsy about their marketing plans, right? But I'm quite good friends with the CSO at Etsy because we can collaborate in sustainability, which I think, we're all trying to get to the same end point, is how I put it.
There are certain things that are very non-competitive.
I was going to say, can you talk a little bit about collaboration among competitors? What are some examples specifically in, Lisa, Kim?
I could bring it right back to packaging and recycling just to kind of keep that idea going in. So I was talking about in Kentucky, where distilleries are located. So with one of our suppliers, a major glass supplier, and then 3 of our competitors, we've come together and invested in a facility. It's called Workwell. And if you're familiar with a Goodwill or a Workwell, it's a facility that provides jobs for people that are coming out of prison and coming back into the communities and looking for job development, as well as people with disabilities. So we put in a cullet processor there that will take the glass from all of our distilleries, from all of those visitor centers, get it there, break it down into cullet, process it, and then help us get it to our glass supplier. But collectively, us doing that is going to create more glass and more opportunity. Just one of many examples.
That's perfect.
Can I
please,
add on this?
yeah, absolutely.
So in this circular value chain, we do see there will be more collaboration between peers, maybe even like competitors. For example, like building infrastructure. There's no single company can afford to build a recycling infrastructure in the U.S. So, but a few of us together, we may be able to do it. So recently, we announced a partnership with CM Cement Group, SCG Chemicals. So there are our peers. It's another petrochemical company based in Thailand. So we announced this partnership. We want to deliver 200 KT of circular solutions in Asia Pacific. The reason we want to partner with them is because we really have a different strengths and we complement each other. SCG, they're based in Thailand. They have a lot of local network. They can access the local waste in Thailand as well as in Southeast Asia. And for Dow, we bring in our material science technology to upgrade the waste, as well as our commercial channel to sell those PCR materials. So we start to see this kind of a win-win collaboration between peers.
Yeah, particularly also for technology development. It seems like those kind of cooperations can really create the scale that allows you to invest in new technologies. I don't know, Lisa, do you also have any sort of specific examples of maybe where you cooperate with peers and competitors?
I mean, I think it's just sort of like packaging. Like, what is the commodity that we all buy? You know, like a limestone filler or something like that. Any of that kind of stuff that's non-competitive, where we often have similar suppliers, I think can be easier if we're all sending a common signal, for example. Then that's easy. The harder part can be if how your product might vary a bit in the recipe, how it's made, et cetera. And then you have to decide between do you want to be on your own in this lane, or do you want to work with something that's more common? And there are pluses and minuses to both of those.
Maybe with the last sort of a few minutes that we have here, I wanted to look forward, right? So what do we expect going forward? How do we expect not only the circular economy and in your particular sort of sectors to change, but how you think that will change partnership? I mean, Lisa, you mentioned sort of just the life cycle of your products are particularly long. So sort of predicting what is going to be either the infrastructure, the technology available at that time can be difficult. Maybe I can just go down the line, starting with Han and coming down here. Let's say in the next 5 to 10 years, what do you see to be the big changes over the horizon that you're looking forward to or that you would like to see?
That's a very good question. I don't have a crystal ball, but definitely I will see more and more collaboration across the whole value chain, different players. So it's no longer a linear, it will become like a web. And among those collaboration, we'll see more and more transparency and traceability. I think, Lisa, you mentioned like a product carbon footprint. We receive a lot of requests from our customers asking, hey, what is the product carbon footprint? But then for the next step, once we establish the baseline, the next step is to show what is the trajectory, what is the decarbonization path. So this year, I can tell you what is the baseline, what is my product carbon footprint. But more importantly to you and to other brands is what is the next 5 years, 10 years down the road, because many of us set up a carbon reduction target of how Dow's decarbonization strategy can materialize and become a support to a brand or our customers' decarbonization journey. So that's what we are working on.
Great. Kim, when you look to the future?
Yeah, great question. And maybe I'll try to just take from and build on that, and then also just give some practical just thoughts, because I know so many of us are struggling in the same area. So as much as we can share that, you can maybe be like, okay, great, I can do the same thing. For us, just in the last couple of years, we've really been struggling with how do we work with our suppliers and gather information about them, about specific greenhouse gas emissions per product, just like you both mentioned. So we spent the last year looking at different models. We've looked at LOCT or LOCT. We've looked at We Mean Business from BSR. We've looked at tons. We've looked at the World Economic Forum has a climate accelerator leaders. And we didn't want to create anything, just Suntory Global Spirits. We wanted to be aligned with the best models so that it was very similar. And what we've created, we call it our supplier maturity mountain. Lisa actually talked about supplier maturity. And so for us, to answer your question about where do I think things are going, I'm super excited where we are and then where we're going to be able to go. Because right now, we used to have the sustainability team, the procurement team, the finance team. Now, that sustainability and procurement team were pretty much lockstep. So as we built the supplier maturity mountain, if you actually thought about it as a pyramid, essentially across our categories, we know glass is our largest hotspot and packaging, our regenerative agriculture, transportation logistics, and then purchase alcohol, because a lot of times we'll purchase alcohol from a competitor in our own products, or we'll sell to them or co-manufacture. So we built supplier maturity mountains for each one of our categories. And if you are a level 1 on our supplier, you're essentially doing your scope 1 and your scope 2 emissions. If you're a level 2, you're doing scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and you're providing us site-specific greenhouse gas emissions. If you're a level 3, you basically have science-based targets, net zero commitments, near-term and long-term commitments. And then if you're level 4, you've built abatement strategies, and we're part of those abatement strategies, and we've seen evidence of your reductions towards those targets. Now, there's a little bit more intricacies, but I'm certainly happy to share, because one of the things we've tried to do is the Beverage Industry Environmental Roundtable. We've shared it with them because if we all work together and have similar models, we'll get much further along. We've shared it across One Suntory. We shared it, wherever we can to kind of help develop these models. And so I'm excited to see the possibilities, because you can see, as we get our suppliers more engaged, we've been doing workshops for a long time, but as they get more comfortable, as they start supplying information, as we build this out, and then it gets into our contracts and into our procurement and into our buyer decisions, and they move it down to their suppliers and tier and tier, this is going to be an exciting time. And you can start to see, I felt like we were pushing water uphill for a long time, and now we're at least paused and the water's at the hill. And I'm really looking forward to seeing it flow down.
That's really interesting. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say at Economist Impact, we do, when you talk about sort of these tiering and scoring suppliers by their different kind of commitments and plans. So we, for example, have a decarbonization progress scorecards looking in different sectors. And a lot of those scores are based on exactly what you're talking about, which is what are established.
I was going to say, for what it's worth, I agree.
Exactly.
With your pyramid.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Lisa, thoughts on the future?
Yeah, so I think the future that's right in front of us, I think for us we feel really good about, because it's based on some really recent past success, and that is two things. One, coming out of COVID, our customers care a lot more about what they're buying. Mm-hmm. And before COVID, we would struggle to be able to spend time with customers talking deeply about these topics. And now we don't see that at all. Like, we're either getting the questions, or when we give the information, we're not getting like glazed over eyes. We're like, oh, I heard something about that. What is it? Shape 3 or scope 3 in a meeting earlier this week. So the customer demand, and then for us, the ability to actually store atmospheric carbon in our products and have them be carbon storing or carbon negative without the purchase of offsets. Mm-hmm. That has been something that's really different, that I think for manufacturers is really unique, as opposed to businesses that do not make stuff. We make stuff, and we have a place to put the carbon. Mm-hmm. So, and we're doing it in, again, a mixed material, as opposed to, it's not like mushroom insulation or like, yeah, that's carbon negative, Mm-hmm. So I'm just really hopeful for the future that we'll see that not just in building products, but just in stuff, all kinds of stuff.
Renee, last word.
Yes. Well, I think what's really encouraging is all these efforts that are happening in companies that don't necessarily relate to eBay on the surface level are all pushing us in the same direction, right? So every time that you're working with a supplier, they might end up being our supplier somewhere along the line, and now we're all like lockstep heading to the same place. So for eBay, I think it's a bit more on the culture side as opposed to manufacturing, right? So what I would like to see happen over the next 5 years or so is this change in consumer sentiment, which you just mentioned, and we've done research on as well, that we're really at this inflection point where people do care more about the things that they're purchasing. And I want to see that shift, not just thinking about it, but putting your money where your mouth is kind of situation. It was said earlier today on one of the panels that it drags behind. 80% of people say they want to do X, Y, and Z, but 20% are. So I want to see the next 5 years that's those two numbers get a lot closer together, because then the businesses like eBay who really want to enable the circular economy, we are successful, but we're also helping to save the planet and, protect your pocket at the same time.
And I guess part and parcel of that 80% is the kind of collaboration, but also information sharing, educating possible clients and consumers, whether B2B consumers or obviously building the fundaments to convince potential clients that these are useful technologies. Great. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Absolutely.
Renee Morin, Lisa Conway, Kim Marotta, Han Zhang. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.